Thanks so much for joining us tonight for the London Fungus Network's first talk of 2021. I know there's still a few people joining us, but yeah, we're now 5:05, so we're gonna kick off. So thanks a lot for joining us for tonight's event called Humans, Books and Mushrooms. And this event really, it's like for those of us who grew up in Britain in the 80s or 90s, it's like a can of Ronsil. So it basically does what it says on the tin. So tonight we're going to be talking to humans who wrote books about mushrooms. Our special guests this evening are Roger Phillips and also Eben Grant. And we're also going to be joined, we've got special guest Ali McKernan, also known as the Fungi Guy. So this is our first event of 2020, and for those of you who are not familiar with the London Fungus Network, we're a new project. We were launched back in August 2020. Our launch event featured the originally from London and now based in Chile, the international mycologist Juliana Furci. And this is now our second online event, which is really exciting. We're part of a bigger project, a bigger initiative called London National Park City, which is an initiative to inspire people about nature and to make London a greener, healthier and wilder place. And I'm a bit biased, but for me, I think that there's nothing wilder than a mushroom. You know, particularly finding a wild mushroom, like in a place like London, like in a big city, like an urban jungle. Like it seems a bit incongruous because one associates mushrooms and fungi with wilderness, nature, old growth forests, which obviously we don't have that much of in a big city. But believe it or not, if you tune into their frequency, then you can find fungi and mushrooms everywhere, even in a big city like London. So our aim at the London Fungus Network really is to connect people with the urban fungal kingdom. And since our launch event, we've managed to hold a number of small, socially distanced fungi forays back in the autumn when it was still safe and legal to do so. These are socially distanced events, and we brought people together to connect with the fungal kingdom and learn about their fungal neighbors, but also to connect with other like-minded people who are interested in fungi and mycologically curious people who want to learn about fungi. And we do hope to be doing more in-person events as soon as it's safe and as soon as it's possible to do so. But in the meantime, we're going to be doing some online events. And one of the benefits of doing online events is that we can bring people together from all different places. We've got people here tonight from all across London, but all across England and the United Kingdom. We've got people from Manchester, Lancashire, Glastonbury, Somerset, also Scotland. We've got also Massachusetts, New York, probably a lot of other places I missed. So first of all, thanks a lot for tuning in. Like we really appreciate it. Yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Roger Phillips and Eben Grant, and after that we're going to have an opportunity to have questions, to ask questions to both of our speakers, and have a discussion about my favorite topic, and I'm sure your favorite topic, mushrooms. So in the meantime, please stay muted, and once we've had the talks, there'll be an opportunity either to put a question in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourselves and ask a question. So for tonight's event, we've got two very different speakers who've written two very different books. Our first is Roger Phillips, and Roger Phillips has been writing books about not just mushrooms, but plants, trees, wildflowers, food and foraging for literally decades. And one of the books Roger is most well known for is this book published in 2006, just called Mushrooms. And it's a really comprehensive guide to over 1,200 different species, mostly species from here in the British Isles. And it really introduced me into into kind of a new world. And it taught me a new language in a way, like a mycological vocabulary, words and concepts I'd never heard of before. Decurrent gills, striated margins, volvas, shaggy caps, elliptical spores, all these kind of things. And it was really an important, getting hold of this book was really an important part in my journey of learning about mushrooms and fungi. And our second speaker is, he's probably the newest player on the UK mushroom scene, Eben Grant. And Eben published his first book, Eben's Book of Bampton Mushrooms, in 2020 during the first lockdown, the coronavirus lockdown. At the age of 6, he's now 7. And this book really, it's unlike any other book about mushrooms that I've ever read. And I do in the London Fungus Network library, we do have quite a few books on mushrooms. And one of the things I love about it is that it has a sense of wonder about fungi and about the natural world. I've given this book to friends, and they message me and they call me and they say, oh, their children are now obsessed with mushrooms. And every time they go out for a walk in the park or down to the woods, they can't stop. They can't stop looking for mushrooms, which is amazing. And this book includes 27 species of fungi. And before I'd heard about this book. And I'd never heard of Eben Grant, and I'd never heard of Bampton. So I did a bit of research, and Bampton is a small town in Devon. And for those of you outside of Great Britain, Devon is a county. It's a primarily rural county in the southwest of England. It's about 200 miles. It's about 200 miles, or just under 4 hours drive from London Fungus Network HQ, and according to the 2011 census, it's home to 1,260 people, which is almost exactly the same as the number of mushrooms species in Roger Phillips' book. But Bampton's also home to a lot of mushrooms, and through Eben's book, he's helping people in Bampton and across the country to try and get to know their fungal neighbours. And at London Fungus Network, we believe that fungi are our friends. We shouldn't fear them, which a lot of people do. And that's the message that's running through both Eben's book and Roger's books. And I was first introduced to Eben's book by this man, Ali McKernan, aka the Fungi Guy, and he wrote the foreword to Eben's wonderful book. And when I get into conversation with people, at work or socially, and the topic mushrooms comes up, and people always say to me, "Oh, it's that old cliche. Oh, does that mean you're a fungi?" The joke's still not funny, but Ali is someone who he does live up to that name, and I urge you to check out his videos on Instagram and his photos on Instagram and YouTube. And they really do put the fun into fungi. And Ali will be in conversation with Eben, and he'll also be treating us to a special edition of his special production, Fungi Vision. Okay, so firstly, some speakers need no introduction. Roger, I think, is one of those people. But for those of you who are perhaps outside of the UK or are new to the mushroom scene and the magical world of mycology, Roger is one of those people who he's a living legend. He's a bit of an institution, and he's written books not only on mushrooms. He's probably best known for this 2006 book. He's also a botanist as well as a mycologist, a painter, and also a playwright. I think in a way it's a bit unfair because Roger has written so many books. I tried to count how many of them there were, and I couldn't come to a definitive number. One of his first books on mushrooms was published, Mushrooms and Other Fungi of Great Britain and Europe, in 1983. He then published a book about mushrooms and fungi of North America in 2005, and has published books on wild food, wildflowers of Britain, the trees of Britain, and his most recent book, The Worldwide Forager, which was published very recently in 2019. So Roger, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Roger, welcome to the London Fungus Network talk. How are you this evening?
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure.
It's a really fun idea. You're to be congratulated, you and all your team. I guess we're bringing together the youngest and possibly one of the oldest. I'm now 89, but I got interested in mushrooms when I was about 6 or 7. Exactly Eben's age, and I suppose it's never left me, although at certain times I wandered off doing other things, but they're absolutely fascinating and impossible to leave alone, really. I want to sort of talk really to Eben, and I hope inspire him to go further with his joy and work looking for and hunting mushrooms. Mushrooms really fall into 2 groups. There are the mushrooms which grow through the woods and are assisting all the plants. I call them the food suppliers, the supermarkets, if you like, of the forest. They're supplying water and food to the trees and plants. And the trees and plants absolutely have to have that food or they would wither and die. Trees can manage on their own, but if there's a drought, they turn to the mushrooms for help. And the mushrooms also are so much more clever than the trees. The fibers of the mushrooms are about 100th the size of tree roots. And so they run right through the land and they can gather up all the chemicals the tree needs to live and pass them on to the tree. And also we're discovering that they can communicate between themselves, between mushrooms and between trees. So they can warn trees that things might be going wrong, there might be a drought, or things might be damaging, there might be a flood. That's the main group and a very important group of mushrooms. But there's another virtually equally important group, and I call them the rubbish collectors. They're the mushrooms or fungi that grow on things. And what they're doing is breaking down the things they grow on. So they grow on twigs and trees and stumps and everything from bodies of animals and insects. And they break down the material, which is almost impossible to break down. Grasses, for instance, a tall grass is held up. I mean, if you think about how narrow it is, how does it ever hold itself up in the air when it flowers? That's stuff called chitin, and it's the strength within plants, and it's almost indestructible. But mushrooms can break it down. They're miracle workers. So they break down all these old bits of plants and transform them into food and eventually into the soil on which all plants live, and all animals live on the plants and the animals. We live on nature. So without the fungi helping the plants, the whole lot of us, plants and all, wouldn't exist.
So Roger, so you've talked about fungi and their relationships with grasses, trees, flowers, other types of organisms, insects, animals, and you've also written books about a lot of those other type of organisms too, those kingdoms of nature. But a lot of people know you for your books on the humble mushroom. So why do you think that is? Why do you think people are so fascinated by mushrooms?
I think they are absolutely fascinating. And of course, traditionally, we didn't know nearly as much about mushrooms as we knew about plants and animals. Much less, in fact. It's a sort of new science in a sense, and we're learning more and more all the time. It's fascinating, the things that are being discovered about mushrooms and fungi and how they manage, how they propagate themselves. We don't know really why they fruit. The mushrooms we see are the fruit of the fungi, that it disperses spores via these fruits, and that's how it propagates itself. We know that, but we don't know what actually causes that to happen. We think it's the rain, and we think, oh, we've had a good rain, there'll probably be mushrooms. And sometimes it's true, and often it isn't.
So I've got your book here, Mushrooms, published in 2006. And in this book, you write that you must have handled over 35,000 specimens of mushrooms over around 30 years in order to get to the point where you were able to produce this book. So in order to find all those mushrooms, you know, to observe them and collect them, you must have traveled to a lot of different parts of the country, maybe even all over the world. And your search, you know, it must have taken you to some really memorable locations. Can you tell us about some of the places and people that searching for mushrooms has taken you to?
Yes, sure. I did quite a lot of the work in Scotland. We went up to somewhere in Perthshire and stayed, well, in fact, it was in a barn right next to the manure heap at this farm in Perthshire. And actually, the guy who owned the whole thing was a rather traditional, mean old Scotsman. I don't wish to insult all Scotsmen. After all, they make Scotch. But he was a bit of a tightwad. So I'd been out collecting, and I found loads of chanterelles, bucketfuls, in the woods around him. And I said to him, why don't you go out and collect these chanterelles? You could stick them in a box, send them to London or Paris, and you'd get paid loads of money for them. And he looked at me and he said, we dunna eat that shite. Cap that.
So what you're telling me is that I think this touches on something in our culture in Great Britain, is that we have something of a culture that's been called, some people call it mycophobic. You know, there is something of a lot of people in our country have a fear of fungi. Like if they, you know, if they get too close to a mushroom, then something bad might happen. Like you know, I saw this. I'm going to share my screen quickly. I saw this picture on. If people can see this. Okay, so I saw this come up on my feed on LinkedIn. So this is a picture of an Amanita muscaria, mushroom posted on LinkedIn by Kew Gardens, and people were freaked out even by a photograph of a mushroom. There's one lady, a tree surgeon, saying, "Don't eat or handle that toadstool." Someone from France who wrote "super poison," and my favorite comment was Chad from Arizona, who just wrote "COVID mushroom." So there is something, I think, in our culture where people do have a fear of fungi, and in your in your travels, have you found attitudes to mushrooms change from place to place or over time?
The British have been very traditionally terrified of mushrooms. You're absolutely right. I hope it's changing now, and people are beginning to learn about them and put that fear behind them. As far as eating mushrooms is concerned, the real answer is to make sure you learn how to distinguish all the poisonous ones first, all the deadly poisonous mushrooms. Learn them first, and then start thinking about what you might eat or what you might give your family to eat. I blame it all on the early natural history writers. 400 or 500 years ago, they were writing that they're disgusting, they're the essence of filth coming up overnight, there's something to do with witches. They didn't understand them at all and generated this British fear of mushrooms. I put it all down to them. Other people have said different things.
And since you started studying mushrooms and writing about them, have you felt attitudes changing at all in Great Britain towards mushrooms? There seems to be a lot of interest now, not just from food, but also in terms of the role fungi play in the ecosystem, natural medicine, sustainable building materials, and all these things. Have you experienced any changes over time?
Yes, enormous. I think, quite honestly, the interest has grown enormously, and people are less scared of them and more engaged with looking at them and eating them and studying them. Wait a minute, I've dried up. I can't remember what I was going to say. This question of medicinal mushrooms is proving very, very important in modern study. People are now looking into some of the abilities of mushrooms to help in curing disease. And they're turning really to the first group, the second of the two groups I talked about, the ones that break down the plant material. And they contain chemicals which can break down virtually every bit of plant material. And so, in fact, when they look into it, they discover they can use these chemicals to break down, excuse me, cancer or diseases. So there's miles still to go to get into that study. The psychedelic mushrooms, the magic mushrooms, are being used in the treatment of mental instability, mental illness, if you like.
And Roger, you also wrote a book on not just on mushrooms in Britain and the United Kingdom, but you wrote a book on mushrooms of North America. So that must have been involved a lot of travel and research, because there are so many species in the North American climate that we don't have here in the British Isles. What prompted you to embark on that journey?
I had this mad idea after I brought out my English mushroom book, my British mushroom book, that I would study the mushrooms of the world. And I went over to America and managed to get a contract and some money in advance to study American mushrooms and do a book on American mushrooms, which I did. And I, with Nikki, my partner, and our two children, originally when I first went, there was only one, and then another one was born And we went every year for 4 months of the year, mainly in the mushroom season, obviously, and we traveled all around America. So literally we would be in Maine 1 week, and we'd travel over the weekend, we'd camp out somewhere in Maine, and I'd collect mushrooms there. Then we'd go from there as far away as I could get, let's say Arizona, and we'd spend a week in Arizona collecting mushrooms and looking for mushrooms, finding very odd mushrooms in the desert. And then from there, we'd go to the north, up near Vancouver somewhere, and we do this crisscrossing America. And so we traveled probably, I think we visited at least 38 of the states and worked on mushroom hunts. But it isn't just me. I want to emphasize, I don't do it all by myself. I go to the people who also know a lot about mushrooms. So there are mycological societies and people with groups like you all over the world. And by joining them, people will introduce you to terrific sites, take you to the best woods or whatever, and help you with your identification. So I learned all of it on the hoof.
It sounds like through your love of mushrooms, it's taken you to some amazing parts of the world, and it's connected you with some interesting people. And I mean, that's something I can relate to. For the last few years, most of my vacations have involved some kind of mushroom-related adventures, or they involved either looking for mushrooms whilst I've been on holiday, or specifically going to somewhere where I knew or that I hoped there would be some amazing mushrooms. I mean, now there's so many mushroom books people can choose from. If you want to learn about identification, there's dozens of books on taxonomy, fungal biology, medicinal mushrooms, foraging, and everything. Like when you were starting out, it must have been a lot different. So, what books or sources did you learn from, and which books were influential for you?
There was a man called Hoare who had done the original Collins book, and that was the only sort of major book around when I got started 40 years ago or whatever it is. And I went to see him, and it was very interesting, and he'd done all this work on the book. He didn't do the illustrations himself. He used illustrations from a famous Danish mycologist, Langer. So he'd used or got permission to use his beautiful drawings. So it was a book of drawings, and it covered as many mushrooms as he could manage, and it was terrific. And he was a wonderful guy. He's long gone, I'm afraid. Back to you.
So, in your career, you've spent a lot of time. Studying and collecting mushrooms, writing about them. Also cooking them and eating them. And like a lot of people report, when they start learning about fungi, like it kind of changes their perception of the world, and they become a bit mushroom obsessed. And this is certainly something that I can relate to. When I first started, I had a book like this, a couple of these pocket books, and they're really good, and they can only take you so far. And then I bought your book and a couple of other of these, these big books. And before I knew it, every evening and weekend, I'd be collecting mushrooms, taking photos of them, looking them up in these books, going online on Facebook groups, and then it reminded me of I think it's a term that was coined by the late American mycologist Gary Linkoff, and he said that sometimes people develop a mycocentric view of the world where they start seeing fungi everywhere. And I just wanted to ask you, is that something that you can relate to?
I think you're referring to Gary Linkoff. It was slightly interrupted. when you mentioned that name.
That's right, Gary Linkoff.
It was Gary Linkoff. He was a wonderful, fun guy, and using that dreadful phrase. And we met at these national meetings. The North American Mycological Society hold summer or autumn forays every year with about 200 or 300 people. And apart from people talking seriously about mushrooms, we tended to put on crazy shows. And Gary was the leader of this, telling funny stories, dressing up as mushrooms, fooling about, and generally having a brilliant time. So the whole world of mushrooms can be very invigorating and very exciting and great fun. And I'm sure Eben will find it more and more so as he gets deeper and deeper into it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have to say, once I started, I got your book, Mushrooms, and I started going out, particularly in the summer, late summer and autumn. It's peak season for mushroom hunting in Britain, and I would go out looking for mushrooms every weekend after work if I had the time. And it got to the point where I was going to bed and I would close my eyes and I could see mushrooms everywhere. And there were no drugs involved, I promise you. It was, but it kind of becomes a bit of an obsession and kind of starts to take over your life and change your perception.
I think rightly so, really. They are immensely important. As I hope I put across, I'm immensely enthusiastic, as you are, about mushrooms altogether, and the whole way they form, what they do, and their part in the whole vast ecology of our world. They're totally and utterly essential. We wouldn't be here without them.
So I've just one more question, Roger, before we hand over to Ali and Eben. And through your books and your talks and your work, you've taught thousands of people not only to identify mushrooms, but how to celebrate them, and to have a sense of wonder in wild fungi and plants. But one thing I'd like to ask you, Roger, is you've taught people about mushrooms, but what have mushrooms taught you?
I can sum that up in one word: insignificance. How insignificant I am and you are, how insignificant we all are in this gigantic world in which we live in, which has been going on for millions of years. They discovered recently in the jawbone of a woman, they found the bones of a woman they found in Spain from 18,000 years ago. In amongst her teeth, they found a mushroom spore. This is the oldest record, the oldest record we have of people eating mushrooms 18,000 years ago.
That is quite phenomenal. Yeah, I take your point about insignificance, and I think, yeah, it's definitely changed. Learning about fungi has definitely changed the way I see myself and my relationship, not just with fungi, but with other species. And you learn, or for me, they've helped me to learn how we're all interconnected. And fungi are one of those things that often people overlook them, or they ignore them, or they think, they're kind of weeds and things that, they shouldn't really be growing there. But really, they are something which, are fundamental to our lives and all life on the planet. One thing that mushrooms have done, one thing I've learned from them is that they've helped me to slow down my life. I'm not in a rush anymore, because I used to be in a rush. I live in London, in a big city. Before coronavirus, I'd take the underground everywhere, thousands of people. It's chaos. But through getting to know mushrooms, it's helped me to slow down my pace of life, because I know that if I slow down, then I will hopefully find some mushrooms on my way to work. And they're here all around us, both in the city and also, and also in the countryside. So thanks a lot, Roger.
That's okay. It's a great pleasure. By the way, I've recorded 50 different species of mushrooms from the garden where I live in Eccleston Square.
So 50 species in one garden in central London, next to one of London's biggest train stations.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay, first, thank you so much, Roger. So now, we're going to hand over to Ali McKernan, who's going to be in conversation with Eben Grant. And before that, Ali's going to treat us to a special production of Fungi Vision, a never before seen production produced especially for the London Fungus Network. So over to you, Ali.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks, guys. Yeah, bespoke was a word you used earlier, and I thought, yeah, that sounds very grand. So, hi, everybody. Thanks for hanging on in there. I won't keep you time for too long because I'm sure you're dying to hear from Eben. But I must just say thanks to Mike for having me here today in the London Fungus Network. And I cannot not start this, because this presentation here today wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Roger. So thank you so much. This presentation and me and my love of fungi wouldn't exist without Roger and all that I learned from him. So to be on even sharing a screen right now is a genuine pleasure, and I'm truly humbled to be here. So what I thought I'd do, it actually ties in really nicely with everything that Roger and Mike said about their love for fungi that's all around us. Mike's talked about urban fungi. Roger's talked about just how many he's recorded from his own garden in a city. Well, what I thought I'd do is take you through 5 places that you might find fungi. Of course, I might be preaching to the converted to somewhat here. You know, I'm sure most of you are fungi fans. But as a result of lockdown, essentially, I looked a little bit closer because I was forced to, of course, we were forced to stay in our local areas. And as a result, I looked a little bit closer. I spent longer in areas that I'd usually pass by and think, nah, I want to be in an ancient woodland. You don't have to be in those spaces. And this year has reminded of me of that. So I'm going to do, this is like a whistle-stop tour. I live in a little town in Manchester, and it's on the edge. I'm like in a city, but also on the edge of the countryside. And so these fungi are what I call urban fungi, but essentially the fact is, you know what? Fungi are so accessible. That's what I love. And they don't discriminate, and they're all around us if you care to look. Do you know what? Let's just find out. Let's see what the first place is. Okay. None of these will be new to you, I'm sure, but it's just a reminder. So first of all, we've got, I call them Edgeland fungi. So these are some of the fungi that I found in these little areas. I think Edgeland has got a proper definition as being places that don't consider themselves either countryside or city, but it's disused railway tracks and canals and gardens and parks and little spaces that don't qualify as either one. And I just love it because it means I can find fungi all the time. It's where I exist. So Edgeland fungi, some examples. Let's have a little look. Number 1, my favorite are roadside verges. I love a roadside verge. I've cycled to work for many years, and the various little grass verges over the whole period of the year through the seasons, I know just where different fungi might fruit. Now, of course, that can be dependent on mycorrhizal fungi. So we've got 4 trees. It's often the trees that are the reason those fungi are there. 4 big ones, if you didn't know anyone here: birch, beech, pine, and oak. That's in my experience. But just as an example, yeah, we've got, just think about roundabouts. Hedgerows are great. I get a lot of St. George's mushrooms under hedgerows. They seem to have an association, in my experience, with hawthorn. Subways. There's a local subway. I'm talking about a grass verge here, not the local sandwich shop. A grass verge. And I get wax caps on there, wrinkled clubs. There's a beautiful set of fairing champignons, all just in this scrappy little subway grass verge. And that's exciting. Knight's tricholomas pop up there. It's always interesting to walk past what could be a mundane route for every other person. If you're a fungi fan, you can find beautiful fungi. So, for instance, yeah, the lurid bolete. I actually don't find this very often, and the only place I do find it are roadside. There's a wonderful fruiting under some lime trees on a very major road on the way into Manchester where I live. We've also got, let's have a look, Fairing Champignon, I mentioned that there. And this was one of my finds for lockdown. So not too far from here, just on a country lane corner, roadside corner, was this. I'm being a little bit naughty because I've crowbarred this in because this is actually a plant, okay? Known as, let's give you the full view, sorry, scroll. The Dutchman's pipe, also known as yellow bird's nest. And this, I mean, just for a fungi fan, as many of you are, I'm sure, you'll have your books and you'll read through these books and there'll be some you see and think, I wonder when that day will come. Will I ever see that? And I just spotted this plant from the corner of my eye, from a car. Please drive responsibly. And I knew immediately, I thought, is that what I think it is? And this is considered quite rare. And it's rare because it can't produce its own chlorophyll. So it can't photosynthesize. So here's the fungal link. This guy taps local trees, but the route to get to it is by parasitizing a fungus. So if you find these, there has to be a fungus nearby. And just to find them on their own, just had me skipping for days. And so I spent months going back. I correctly identified it. It is what it was. And for months, I went back hoping that I'd actually see the fruit body because, of course, it was tapping the mycelium, which is always underground. And sure enough, 3 months later, some tricholomas came up, which was all tied in tricholomas, willow trees. What a find. And, and that's just on some scratty corner of some roadside verge. Just wonderful. So, yeah, keep your peepers peeled. All right, moving on. Number 2, Scratchy Woods. I'm sorry I've not got a better name for them, but I'm talking about, again, these edgelands, like the edges of playing fields. My son plays football for a local football team, and I'll always go for a little walk around the edges of football pitches because there's these little woodlands. I've got one near me, near a playing field, and I don't usually spend much time there because it's predominantly ash and sycamore. And for anyone who doesn't know, those are not great mycorrhizal species, so you don't get much associated fungi with that. However, what you do get is what Roger talked about earlier, which are those wonderful saprotrophs. Those guys, the recyclers, those ones that that are our composters and decomposers, the soil magicians. And so I spent a lot more time in this little space, just enjoying it as a natural space anyway during lockdown. But as a result, I came across this and I got very, very giddy. Can we see it there? Is it high enough? I got very giddy at this. Essentially on this log, and I've been staring at mushroom books for years now, was what looked like, but for all intents and purposes, a purple chanterelle. I mean, a violet one. So it's like, what could this be? It's not an amethyst deceiver, and it's not a fiber cap. What is this? And it didn't take long to look through the books when I got home, but I was so giddy, and because I knew this was something unusual that I couldn't retain it from any book I'd ever read. And it turns out it was the Lilac Oysterlink, something quite uncommon by all accounts from what I hear. And the fact that I haven't seen it posted on all the social media platforms told me it was something lovely. So to find that in this scratchy woods that I've never given much attention to was, again, just proved me right that fungi are all around us if you care to look. All right, moving on. Let's have a look. Parks and gardens. Number 3. They kind of speak for themselves. I don't have a garden. I have a little yard, but I have created a log pile. Okay, so that's something you can do if you're in a similar position to me. Create yourself a log pile, just grab some old logs and twigs and sticks and watch them decompose over the years, and they will provide you with fungi, okay? But the local park, I get horse mushrooms out there, wonderful displays of sheathed wood tufts and shaggy scaly caps. And this year I got, I think I've done a picture. Yeah, that one, the spectacular rustgill. A wonderful name and a wonderful thing to find because it was about 3 feet away from the children's climbing frame. If you're going to go mooching around, I should at this point put a disclaimer in, around children's playgrounds, make sure you've got your children with you. We can look strange enough as it is as a fungi forager at the best of times. So pick wisely. Number 4, wood chips, wood chip beds. Look, I've put the main star of the show here, morels. For those who don't know, morels can often be found in their time, their season, which is spring, popping up on wood chip beds all over the country. I have a cracking spot. They'll only fruit once in theory at my local Lidl, about 200 meters down the road. And obviously, again, I had a great time mooching around Lidl car park, finding myself some morels. Think compost heaps, think pub car parks, B&Qs. I'll let you do the rest. I'll let you do the maths. But how about that? Wood chip fungi can be brilliant and very exciting. Oh, cabbage parachute. You know, this walk over the year, over months and months of it degrading, new fungi come in and do their job. And I found a whole host of cabbage parachutes, which again is fabulous, right where morels had been 3 months before. And on to now, oh, sorry, I said the first one was my favorite. This is my favorite. My new favorite space, cemeteries, churchyards, graveyards, known as God's Acre. This year, I was very excited at the potential of going to them. Lots of us do have a graveyard or churchyard nearby, and they're usually a well-established space. And that's the key here. Now, there's 2 reasons why you might want to visit a local church. Well, there's many reasons actually you might want to visit the local church. But if it was for fungi, it's because it's a special space. You have 1, well-established trees and often some beauties like yew and beech. But 2, I was there for a different reason. I was there for the lawns, the grassy spaces, especially the mossy lawns, because those spaces almost are identical to where we'd usually find wax caps. Wax caps, traditionally unimproved grassland that not been touched by industrial farming or fertilizers. And so usually you have to go up into the hills and the tops where it's grazed. But actually, because they're short mown and well kept and well established, usually over 50 years, you get incredible wax caps at your local churchyard. So this year, I took it upon me to do a graveyard tour during lockdown. Okay, even I got the local OS map, and I ticked off all the different churchyards where I try and visit in my little area, my like 2-mile radius. And I found some beautiful, beautiful things. I normally wouldn't find the time to just start mooching around graveyards. I'd be off to the woods. But man, it delivered on so many levels. I found parrot wax caps, earth tongues, wrinkle clubs, a wonderful array of things. I do have to mention this, the Ballerina Wax Cap, a very special fungus, really well thought of by lots of people. I'm fortunate in the Northwest, we do get quite a few in various grassland spots. I'd probably meet it a handful of times at the very most in a year. But I went to 6 spots, 6 churchyards in one weekend, and it was in 4 of them. And I was just blown away. And in one particular one that didn't look so glamorous, it wasn't a beautiful space by any means. It was quite a rundown looking churchyard. But on its lawn, in perhaps 20 square meters, there were over 50 fruit bodies. And it really made me reevaluate whether this is actually rare at all, or perhaps at least even locally common. Maybe it was just having a good year. But nevertheless, I came across what the Americans might call the mother lode. And I was absolutely delighted. So there's a little bit of, you've got to be in it to win it. So I found myself very close to the camera there. My face is very close. I do apologize. I've got myself a bit giddy. Yes, you've got to be in it to win it. And by putting yourself in these spaces, wonderful things can come to you. So that's it. That was just a few of the different spaces. There are many, many more. But if you're thinking of just what's on your doorstep discoveries, which many of us are having to at the moment and may potentially have to do for a little bit longer, just don't forget about these spaces because they can provide. Always one eye on the grass verge. But finally, one of my ultimate highlights for the whole of my lockdown was this moment when I found out about this. And it's the reason many of you are here, I'm quite sure. It was Eben. Eben's book of Bampton mushrooms, to be precise. And what a highlight to my year this has been. And perhaps even all my mycological, I wouldn't call myself a mycologist, but my fungal time, because I was absolutely delighted, thrilled, and so impressed by this book and what this young man set out to achieve. And everything about this book, the reason lots of you here who would have read it would know, the charm that it's got. It's such a pure viewpoint of fungi, and clear that someone just like many of us just absolutely loves fungi, and to see someone so young and with such good intentions when we start talking about, of course, using it as an opportunity to raise money for the Wildlife Trust. Just wonderful. So without further ado, that's the end of my fungi vision. Thanks for bearing with me on that. I think we should head over to Eben, if you can hear me. Eben, I'd love to say hello and ask you a few questions on behalf of many people here this evening. Are you there, Eben?
Yes.
Yes, he says with a big voice. Hi, Eben. Should we all give Eben a big wave? Hello,
Yeah.
Eben. Yay. That's you. Oh, Eben. I can see, it's funny, Eben, because I was talking and I was quite enjoying myself. But actually, the minute that I stopped and I showed that picture of you then, Eben, I could see all the faces around me. Everybody started smiling because they're so pleased to see you, Eben, and to hear from the man, this other legend who's here tonight alongside Roger. It's just wonderful. Hey, Eben, I'm going to ask a few questions that I know I would love the answer to, and hopefully it covers some, and maybe at the end there'll be a chance for other people, if I don't cover that question, to ask you. But what this, hopefully, I'm going to ask some simple ones, I think, but I'm just dying to know, when did it start for you, Eben? Do you remember when you started getting into mushrooms, or why?
About 2 years ago.
Stop. 2 years ago. I'm thinking you've got years of experience because of this knowledge that you shared in your book. And you're telling me you've only been doing this for 2 years. That's wonderful, Eben. And why did it start? What caught your eye?
I can't remember what I saw first.
Mm-hmm.
But since I saw that, I was just like, what on earth is this? It's just crazy. What is it?
Do you know what? That's the best way to start in most things, I think, Eben, by asking a question. Asking questions can get you a long way in life, so I think you did the right thing there. And do you remember what your actual first mushroom was then? Do you remember what it was?
No.
No, you don't. No, that's fair enough.
Too long ago.
Too long ago.
Can't remember.
No, it's too long ago. I know what it's like. You lose your own memory, don't you? Tell me, so you might not remember the first moment, but now here you are, 2 years later, producing your own book. What is it, Eben, for you that you love so much about fungi?
It's just there's so many, and there's so many different shapes, so many different sizes, so many different types, and it's just fascinating.
Isn't it? I have to agree. There's a few people nodding their head. And you're right. And it's funny, Eben, because I think some people might be a little bit overwhelmed. Some people who love nature can find that a bit scary because it's like, there's too many. I don't know what this one is or this one. Yet you see that as a wonderful challenge. And I feel something similar. And I'm sure I can speak on behalf of Roger. It's probably something similar for Roger. So considering there are so many, how have you got so good at identifying them all?
Well, normally, we find out in one of my books, or we look up pictures of possibilities.
Okay. Am I allowed to ask what books you use? Because obviously the good ones, what books are you using to find your fungi?
Well, normally I have used this one.
Oh, it's a good one. It's a good one.
Small one. The small. It's on there. And the little Gem Collins one.
Oh, a great starting point. So very good. So Collins have done you well there, and Roger, fantastic combination. Very good. And if you come across mushroom, if say you come across one, Eben, and you're not quite sure, is your memory, because you've looked at those books a lot now, can you think, I know which one this might be, so that when you open your book, you know where to go? Do you remember them? Yeah, very good. I think you will be. I mean, you're probably already England's youngest mycologist, but I think you're going to be. I can't wait to see how far this goes for you, Eben, because your ability to remember them. Lots of adults find that difficult, but you're doing such a good job. And then to the point we end up writing a book. Eben, what came first? What made you want to write the book? At what point did you think, I'm going to make this a book?
Back when I saw it, I wanted to raise money for the Wildlife Trust, and then I was just like, how do I do it?
Got you. So the two things came together, really. You weren't sure how to do it, and you thought a book on mushrooms might be quite popular. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. And how many books, because I bet no one here will know this, but you will. How many books have you sold now, Eben?
I have sold 370.
Oh, let's give that a round of applause. Just wonderful. I'll make the noise. Everyone's on mute. Oh, Eben, you must be so proud. That's just wonderful. And have the Wildlife Trust thanked you for that then?
Yes.
That's nice.
They adopted me a dormouse.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it? That's the top of everyone's list. To adopt a dormouse. Very nice. You smashed it there. Oh, isn't that lovely? That's brilliant. And so, hey, what about, I tell you what I was thinking about when I was going through this book, and I'm thinking about how quickly you're progressing. Have you thought about a second book, a second volume?
I have.
Ah, and so have you started? I see. I wonder now then, Eben, when you're out now, because there are fungi around, not as many in winter, are you already thinking this will make it in the book? What was the most recent? Yeah, I bet you are. So this time, maybe you'll find it even harder because you'll have so many photographs on your phone or your camera. Is that true?
Yep.
Right, so you're going to do a second edition. Fantastic. And are you just going to wait till you've got enough pictures, or are you waiting until you think this one's finished?
I'm waiting until I think this one's finished.
Yeah, okay, that's a very sensible. That's a great business acumen. That very good, Eben. That. What's your what have you not found yet, Eben? Have you got? Because every person on every screen here, I'm sure. Although I don't know, I could ask Roger this. Has still got some fungi they've never found. Actually, maybe there's one person in this Zoom call that has found them all. But most of us still have some fungi we'd love to find that we've never yet found. Do you have any from your books?
I do. I've got a lion's mane.
Ooh, yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
Ballerina wax cap.
Oh, sorry. Well, maybe one day. If you come up this way when we're allowed, we'll have to do a foray together, Eben. And you'll come up this way. I'll show you some places. Okay. Any others?
Bird's nest.
Oh,
a bird's nest fungus.
Oh, very nice. Well, that's the other name for that thing I just talked about, isn't it? The yellow bird's nest fungus. Oh, well, you'll do very well then, Eben. That's very nice to know, isn't it? Well, look, you've already found some things. See, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, I found 2 of those. But you found 2 things just this year. I'll tell you what you found. Hair ice. Didn't you find hair ice?
Yeah, I found one of that.
See, that's still on my hit list. Years and years, Eben. Even today, I was out walking with my children and I was pretending to listen to them talking, but really I wasn't listening to my children. I was looking for hair ice, Eben. And I didn't find it. And my kids probably knew I wasn't really listening to them because they don't like walking with me anymore because they know I'm always looking for fungi. Well done you on hair ice. What's been your favourite find this year?
Well, I found my first collared earth star.
Oh, it's another nice one. Another nice one. Was it on its own or was there a few of them?
And the caterpillar club.
Oh, another good one. That caterpillar club's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because obviously, maybe if there was a few, you could always have a little dig around. I think that's really important as learning sometimes to pick one and have a little look. And I know you do that safely. And maybe next time you find it, have a little dig down, see if you can see the caterpillar still attached. I think that's a really good learning point. That those are. I can't think of many. How old are you now, Eben?
7. I went back and saw the Scarlet Caterpillar Club again and dug for it.
Look at this. This guy's, you're all over it, Eben. It's wonderful. I can't think of many 7-year-olds that would have seen these things in their life. It's just wonderful. I tried to get my children into them, Eben, and to be honest, my oldest, Digby, he's 12 now. He's been doing it since he was your age. He can't stand the sight of fungi anymore. He's annoyed with me for showing him so all the time. He can spot a blusher from 20 yards. So I've given him that skill for life, but really he's fed up of it. I'm so pleased to see children who are still interested. It's wonderful, Eben. Really, really great. Is there anyone else in your family into fungi, Eben? I reckon there must be some parents who are working alongside you.
My mum and my dad.
Do they like finding it too?
Yeah.
That's very nice. That's a lovely thing, isn't it, when you've got that support? And I think this might be one of my last questions, because I wonder, do you have any other hobbies that are as big as fungi? Because I know I try to get into other things, Eben, and I want to, but fungi always overtake them because they're everywhere and part of my day every day. Do you have any other big hobbies apart from fungi?
I like finding all nature.
Then again, you're just good. You value so much, Eben. That's a wonderful thing to value all that nature brings. That's nice. Actually, I think I've seen you. Do you look at moths as well? Do you like moths?
Yeah, I really like moths.
Yeah, well, I learnt about those. I built a little moth trap, one of those where you can catch them safely and let them go again. I did that in lockdown. Yeah, in fact, because of lockdown, a couple of good things that tie us all together here. I also, I said I can never get past fungi, but because of lockdown, Roger, I pulled out your book of wildflowers, and every week I taught myself one new wildflower. And I was teaching. I'm a primary school. I work in a primary school. And I made a video every day for the children at home to go out and try and do something on their doorstep. And so we were learning together, me and the children at school, using your book, Roger, learning all the wildflowers. And I loved it. I absolutely loved that. So because I was given the time, I did find another hobby.
I love flowers too.
Oh, Eben, you know what? You will teach me some things. The day when we meet, Eben, you'll teach me some things. It's been absolutely lovely to talk to you, Eben. Really has been a pleasure. So many people are so impressed with what you've achieved and the way that you've achieved it. It's wonderful. So, Eben, thank you so much for what you've done. Another big round of applause, I think, for Eben Grant. Eben's book of Bampton mushrooms. And he made Bampton famous. I'd never heard of Bampton. It's brilliant. It's really good. Really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eben. You're a star. You really are.
Thanks so much, Ali, and thanks also to you, Eben. That was really, thanks so much for joining us tonight for our Zoom talk. So now we have an opportunity for people, to ask questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, either put it on the chat. Everyone's going to be unmuted, so please put the questions in the chat. Or if you are tech savvy and are able to raise a hand, then you can ask a question that way as well. But first,
Mike, while those first questions just come in, am I allowed to just ask? I prepared a very mini quiz for Roger and Eben, a quiz about their own books. Am I allowed to ask just a couple of questions while we wait for the others to come in?
Of course you are.
Yeah, it's a mini quiz. Roger, would that be all right to ask a couple of questions? You're going head to head against Eben. Okay, we'll go for Eben first. Eben, in your book, there is a horse mushroom. You've got a picture of a horse mushroom, and there's a hand appears for scale to show us how big it is. Whose hand is in your book?
My dad's.
Yes, 1 point to Eben. He's winning so far. Now, Roger, can you hear me, Roger?
Yes.
Now, a good friend of mine who taught me fungi, a wonderful inspirational character called Jesper Launder. He taught me all about fungi, and one day we were together, and he said, there's a mushroom growing near here, and it was a trading estate. He said, and it's the only mushroom in your book, Roger. I might be wrong, so I'll blame him. But he says there's only one mushroom that you consider delicious. Lots and lots of fungi you call edible. Lots are good. Lots are excellent, but there's one that's delicious. Do you remember what mushroom that is, if I'm right?
Was it the black trumpet? I'm not sure I do remember.
Do you know what? I haven't checked, so we'll presume that you could be right because it's your book after all, Roger. The last thing I want to do. But
Okay, I'll go for the black trumpet.
I believe, and I did go and find it when, just recently when I thought I would do this. It's Agaricus lanipes.
Yeah.
And it's the only one, and I checked, and I didn't check every mushroom word for word, but it's the only one I could find that says delicious. It's a good one, that. And the black trumpet you would also rate, would you?
It sort of bleeds when you handle it.
Yes. Yes, we saw some of that there, yeah. We did see some of that. Thanks, Roger. Eben, question number 2. What fungus was it that your grandma found? Ooh. Oh, I've put him on the spot.
Giant polypore.
Yes, well done, Eben. Very well done. Very well done. Okay, I'll make this my last question. I said it was a mini quiz. Last question to Roger. Roger, a few people dared me to ask you this question when I put it out on social media because I've been fascinated by this for years. But for all the people on this call tonight and the thousands of people that must own this book in this country, you know, and it was my first ever mushroom book too, and continues to be one I open every week without fail. Do you know what the secret is on the front cover that lots of people might never have noticed unless they look closely?
Absolutely no idea. Obviously a magic.
Oh, then I do apologise. But I mean, I say it's a secret. It just tickled me in this age of beautiful photos that people can achieve with their cameras and phones and trying to find the perfect picture. This is a gorgeous picture of Boletus edulis, but just on the cap there are maggots. And I always wondered, did you know there were maggots on the caps of your porcini?
Maggots don't worry me. When I was growing up, we used to find field mushrooms and cook them, and the maggots would float to the top. We boiled them in milk, my grandmother's recipe, and we ate the maggots as well because they just tasted mushrooms.
And a little extra protein. The perfect answer, Roger. Thank you so much for your time and for being a good sport. Thank you, guys. Over to Mike then. Let's field some questions, proper questions from the people of the public.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions come through the chat, and if anyone is feeling bold as well and would like to ask a question directly to ask a question directly, then please raise your hand. Okay, so a couple of questions coming through. So Thrin and Frey asked, I've asked Eben and Roger, what is your favourite mushroom?
Raise your hand.
I think it's the age-old question, isn't it? What's your favourite mushroom?
Okay, can I have a go? It's a mushroom I find that day. It's such a joy finding things. So it's not a question of one mushroom is better than the other. They're all wonderful. Eben, over to you.
Exactly what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to third that, actually. People ask me the same question, and you know, it depends from year to year or season to season or even week to week. And you know, I'll find one mushroom and I'll be like, this is the most amazing mushroom. You know, I found year before last, 2019, I found a hen of the woods, Pagoda frondosa, known as maitake. And I'd never found these before, and I found them 10 minutes from my house, and then I found them in 2 or 3 other locations in London, and like I was pumped. But I've been back to each of these trees, and I haven't seen them since. So you know, it's no longer, you could say it's no longer my favourite mushroom, but it's yeah, it's part of the magic is finding them. So I can see we've got a hand up from William Holmes. If you would like to unmute yourself.
Hello, as you can probably guess, I'm not actually William. I'm William's wife, Karen. I'm just on his iPad. Hi, Roger, Eben, everybody else. I've been foraging for a couple of years now with my children. We've mainly been getting elderflowers and making cordial and blackberries and things like that. And I got your book, World Food, Roger, for my birthday a couple of weeks ago. And I can't stop reading it. I love it because I love cooking. So the combination of countryside and cooking for me is it's been wonderful. And I thought I'd be brave and start to forage for some mushrooms. So I took my 5-year-old with me today. He's following in your footsteps, Eben. He's only 5 and he's really enjoying looking for mushrooms with me. We've been to my local woods today and we've actually found quite a few different types. And I've brought them back, but we obviously haven't eaten them because I'm looking at the pictures and I'm pretty sure I know what they are. But would you say that you really need to go on a foraging course really first and have somebody identify them with you before you try them? What did you do, Eben, the first time you found mushrooms? How did you feel brave to try them when you weren't 100% sure what they were?
I don't eat them.
Oh, you don't? Ah, so you were just finding them just because you love looking at them because they're beautiful.
Yeah.
Aha, I see. Oh, well, like, maybe I'm just a bit greedy, but I really fancy cooking with them because I love cooking. So that's why I think I loved your wild food book, Roger, so much. But because I've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, I'm really worried about eating them until I've had a positive identification of them. Is it best to go on a course or to go on a foraging trip with somebody that can positively identify them first?
Spend as much time with people who are expert as you possibly can to learn things. Have you got them there? You could stick them up on the screen and we'll have a look.
Oh my gosh, really? Could I?
Yeah.
That would be wonderful, because I think I might have found some chanterelles today, which I was so excited about, but I haven't wanted to eat them because I've been a bit nervous about it. So if I could show you, that would be brilliant. I wonder if, yes, let me just go and get them. 1 second.
Okay.
Maybe somebody else would. Okay, maybe someone else would like to ask a question while I'm gone.
Whilst we're waiting for the live mushrooms, I'll just add that I'm a forager myself, and that's how I got interested into the wider world of fungi. But it's something that it's really you know, it's not something to rush into. You know, you cannot learn foraging just from one book or one course. It's something, whether it's plants, berries, mushrooms, whatever, leaves, it's something that you have to spend a lot of time learning about and researching, and you know, you spend actually more time learning about the organisms, the mushrooms and the plants, than actually eating them. So yeah, if anyone is thinking of getting involved in wild food or foraging, do your research, do a lot of it, ask experts, go on courses, and certainly don't munch on a hunch.
No, and I think that's when I told my mum and dad today on the phone that we've had a brilliant trip to the woods and I'd found some mushrooms, they were like, you might want to just check what they are before you eat them. So anyway, these are some, if I could, I'm just going to switch my camera around, see if I can work out how to do that. Oh yeah.
You press on yourself.
That's
and
it.
then you press the camera. I always do that. I know how to do it.
You know how to do it as well?
I always know how to do it. I always did.
Right. I'm just wondering if I can...
Hold them up in front of the camera.
Let me find where the camera is.
I'll do it.
That's okay, darling.
The little dot on your screen, above the screen.
Whoops. Oh.
So
I'll just turn, so that's sort of the back, if you like, where the gills are. Can you see that okay?
Are they descendants? Are they current?
Yeah, let's have a look at the other side as well.
And then that's sort of like the other side.
So I'm going to say that's a very beautiful yellow orange looking mushroom, but I think it's going to be next to impossible to identify it reliably over this medium of Zoom video. So perhaps if you'd like to send us a couple of photos to London Fungus Network at hotmail.com, and we'll see what we can see if we can attempt to identify it. There are a few other people with their hands up, and I know some. We're just going to have to move on to some other questions.
Yes, of course.
But yeah, drop us an email with the photos and we do what we can. So I know there's a question from Inara in London.
Lovely.
So thank you very much. So if everyone could mute, and if Inara, you'd like to unmute and ask us a question.
Hello, thanks for the book.
Okay, do you want to ask Eben something? Eben, sorry. Do you want to ask Eben? Pucho.
Can I ask Eben?
A question? Yes.
Can I ask Eben a question?
Huh?
Yes.
Pucho? Yes. Eben said yes. Go on.
Thanks for writing that wonderful book for me. And could I send a letter to you?
Yes, can. I
Yes.
love
We all loved your book, and thank you, Mike, for gifting it to us on the foray. And thank you, Roger and Ali and everyone. And Inara really wants to write a letter to you, so if that's possible.
Yes, I met Inara and her mother on a socially distanced foray that we had with the London Fungus Network back in October, and I know that Inara has become a bit of a mushroom fanatic. So I'll be happy to put Inara in contact with Eben. So if you want to talk mushrooms or write mushroom letters to each other, then that will be fantastic. Thanks so much. I know that there were people who had their hands up on their cameras, but I can't see you all. So there's a function to raise a hand electronically. I can see David. I can see David with his hand up. So David, if you'd like to unmute.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay?
Oh, hello, hello.
Awesome.
Hello.
Hey. So yeah, thank you so much, Ali, Eben, Roger, for the amazing talk. Yeah, the enthusiasm, the charisma was really contagious there. So yeah, thanks for that. I have a question for Roger, actually. I got your book probably about almost 2.5 decades ago when I was about 3 years old. It was the first book I ever actually got as a gift, and that kind of set me off for the rest of my life. How do you learn all these mushrooms, thousands of species? How do you begin even starting to learn all of them? I mean, do you do it one by one? Do you do it ecosystem by ecosystem? What's your secret?
You do it. I did it one by one. So I would go out. The Mycological Society also run forays, and I would go out with them and find things and ask the leader, "What's this?" And he would tell me, and I'd write it down and take the mushroom home with me and look at it again. And then the next week when I'd go out, I'd probably find it again and forgotten what it was and say, "What's this?" And after a while, it all starts to sink in and you start to recognize them and get used to noting the big factors. Like with the chanterelle, the gills have to run right down the stem, and they're not proper gills. They're just like folds of the flesh of the mushroom, but they run right down the stem. Characteristics like that you learn, and that helps you with your identification. So I'm talking to the lady who was just on a bit really as well. But that's it. One by one, learn them up and keep looking them up in books, keep finding them, and eventually they start to stick.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, David. So there's a question that's come in from Lara S, and she says, it might be a silly question, but are fungi only found in terrestrial ecosystems? So are they only found on the land?
What other ecosystems are you thinking of? They certainly can survive in space. They've been testing things on outer space, and almost anything animate dries up and is destroyed instantly by the heat of the sun or the cold of the air. And some mushrooms can survive that and revive. But whether they grow there or not is a different question. I imagine all over the universe there are fungi.
And I wonder if they, so I think the question is also asking, we mostly find fungi on dry land, so on grass, in forests, places like this, but can they also be found in, like say, in the sea or in rivers or places like that, in aquatic ecosystems?
Yes, they can be found in water.
I think one of the I'm no evolutionary biologist, but I think one of the theories is that terrestrial life, like life began in the oceans, and terrestrial life began partly due to fungi colonizing terrestrial ecosystems. I think Merlin Sheldrake in his book has possibly written about this.
Yes, that's an excellent book, by the way, Merlin Sheldrake's book. In the beginning of time, when fungus developed, when things started to come up out of the ocean, they were in the form rather like lichens or lichens, and they started eating rocks, crudely using the word eating, and they broke down the rocks, and that started to form the soil, so out of that soil plants could begin to grow. In other words, in a sense, they were there completely before plants, as well as now supporting them. That's what I have to say about that.
So thank you, Roger. There's a question that's come in from Isabella Johnson saying, Roger, we know which fungi are on Ali and Eben's hit lists, but have you got any fungi yourself, Roger, that you're still looking for?
You mentioned Gary Linkoff in your introduction. Gary went to he died a couple of years ago, by the way, and there's a street named after him in New York, which is brilliant. But he went and did a discovering mushrooms in New Zealand, and there are there some very extraordinary mushrooms. There's one, I think it's called the Pagoda Mushroom, where you have a mushroom and then another mushroom goes out to the top of it and another one goes out to the top of that. So you have a series of mushroom caps growing out of each other. I'd love to find one of those.
Wow, thanks, Roger.
Hi.
Thank you.
I think there was a raised hand as well from another David. So if you're still there, if you're still online, David, and you'd like to ask a question, either unmute yourself or put it on the chat, please.
Yep, unmuted. Yes, I've unmuted. Yes, I have put it on the chat as well. It's just to say that just this question for Eben, asking him if he has a favourite mushroom, and if so, which one?
I love them all, but Aminatas are my favourites.
Lovely. You're doing a great job, Eben. Great job.
Thank you
very much.
Okay, one more question from Ali. Ali's asked, what's the best thing to do when trying to identify a fungus? Should I pick it, or a spore print's a better option? So I think this is more of a question for Roger.
Yeah, I guess am I still unmuted? A spore print is useful because it tells you the colour of the spores. And that in many ways is a distinctive thing. But there are about 700 white spored fungi. So it doesn't give you a total solution. Picking the mushroom, I think, is a good idea. Some people have debated whether one should ever collect mushrooms, damaging the plant and that sort of thing. And I think it's just complete rubbish. I mean, when you go to Italy, where they've been eating mushrooms since the time of Julius Caesar, they find just as many mushrooms now as they ever did, and they're just as popular. So I don't think they're doing any harm. It's like picking an apple off a tree. Take the mushroom home so you can examine it carefully. Look, the first thing is it a gilled mushroom, or does it have pores in place? of gills? Does it have neither of those? Does it have a funny smell? How big is it? You need all these factors. And what is the shape of the cap? And you start building up a series of little definitions of the mushrooms. And then when you look in more detail, you look how the gills are attached to the stem. As I said, in chanterelles, they run right down the stem. In some mushrooms, they're attached directly to the stem. In some mushrooms, they're separate. And some mushrooms, they just touch the stem. And these are all definitive characters for identifying a mushroom. Yeah, I could go on and on, of course.
Thank you, Roger. So I think what that tells us is there's no one way to identify a mushroom. People often ask me, people who, they don't know really much about mushrooms, and it comes up in conversation, and they say, "Oh, so how can you tell a poisonous mushroom from an edible mushroom?" And there isn't a way to tell. A mushroom doesn't look poisonous or edible. As Roger was saying, you have to go through the characteristics in a really methodical manner. And if the mushroom, say, doesn't match even one characteristic, then you can't be sure of your identification. And really, if you're only looking, I started off looking for edible mushrooms, but then, I realized that, I was kind of missing the bigger picture because, there are maybe in this country, people talk about poisonous mushrooms. There's less than 10 mushrooms that are deadly poisonous, and a few more which will make you sick. Mushrooms that are worth eating, maybe there's 20 or 30 species that people collect for food. But in our country, in Britain alone, there are thousands of species of fungi that produce mushrooms. So, for me, I started identifying them, and for food, but then it just, to excuse the pun, but the obsession mushroomed. So now when I go out, okay, I'll see a few edible mushrooms, but I know, for me, all mushrooms are worth finding, and they're all worth learning about.
You're right.
Roger, there's been a few questions about your distinctive headwear, your red beret with the white spots on it, and someone's asked, Erin Ragamonster has asked, what's the story behind Roger's hat and what are the pins on it? I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let you explain.
Okay, it was given to me by a mad potter friend from Shanagarry near Cork in Ireland. And he just brought it as a little gift, and I thought, good God, that looks like a fly agaric. That's going to be my hat for good. Sorry? Yeah, the badges. You can probably see more closely now. They're my daughter's band. She's called Lilac Oysterlink. She produces wonderful, wonderful music. Go and find her on YouTube or wherever.
Thanks, Roger. So someone has asked to repeat the name of the red mushroom that you're talking about, which is the same mushroom, I think, that is the inspiration behind your spectacular headwear. So that's the Amanita muscaria, and the common name is the fly agaric.
Yeah. Which was used traditionally to kill flies. It contains poisons, but actually it can also sometimes be taken as a sort of medicinal drug type mushroom. Don't touch it. It contains poison.
I think the fly agaric is interesting because it touches on these kind of fears about it's poisonous, edible, and hallucinogenic, all in one. It's certainly nothing that I would let go past my lips. But it's one of those mushrooms which I think captures people's imaginations, and I remember seeing them when I was before I got really interested in mushroom identification. I'd see them in a park under some birch trees because they're mycorrhizal and they grow in connection with the roots of certain trees like silver birch. And I remember seeing it, and I remember feeling scared, you know, or like partly amazed, but also scared. Like, you know, if I get too close to it, like is something bad going to happen, or is it going to transport me to another dimension?
They're the mushroom that is most often shown in fairy books, children's books, the mushroom of mythology, perhaps.
And speaking of mushroom-inspired headgear, Mr. McKernan, I've noticed has now donned something. So could you perhaps, you know, talk us through that?
I'll be very honest. I don't think I'm deserving of wearing a red beret yet, just because I've shared a screen with Sir Roger. But my wife pointed out she has a red beret. She was whispering to me in the background there of our bedroom, so she threw the red beret over. So just for a moment, I get to be alongside and like my hero. So it's just good to be nearby.
Brilliant. You need a few dots on it.
I need a few dots and a few bin badges and a son in a band. So I've got 1 out of 3 so far.
Yeah, you're getting there. And maybe the glasses as well.
Well, yeah, that'll happen. My dad's wearing them. It's bound to go.
So they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery.
Of course.
So it's 6:35. So we're gonna start wrapping up soon. So there's time for, before we do that, it's time for one more question. And there's a question that's come through from Nina Lovelace, and it's addressed to Roger, but I'd say, you know, if Eben or Ali would also like to chip in. So Nina's asked, what is the strangest thing that's happened to you when out fungi spotting?
Oh, Eben, you better go first while I think about it.
I can't think of anything either.
Oh, right. We often had some very funny times in America. Over on the west coast of America, we went up into the Cascades collecting. And there was a guy who'd made a sort of mini profession of it. He collected chanterelles and shipped them to restaurants and so on. But while he was collecting the chanterelles, he often found psilocybin magic mushrooms. And so he just automatically collected those and put them in a basket. And so at home, he built up a giant stock of them. And then someone said to him, well, why don't you advertise and sell them? So he put an advertisement in a magazine saying, I've got psilocybin for sale. When he woke up the next morning, his house was surrounded by the FBI.
That's superb. I don't have anything half as glamorous, but I've just realised I have one moderately funny tale, Mike, for an incident. I found my first ever giant puffball a few years ago. I'd seen them on forays with other people, but when you find your own place of your own mushroom yourself for the first time, that's a joyous moment. And that very evening, I was going to go to an open mic evening, play some tunes and actually sabotage it and try and teach the people who were supping glasses of wine all about fungi. And I thought, what a great prop. So I walked and I found it in a graveyard, which had also produced some really special fungi, again, another cemetery. And so as I was walking out the graveyard, a woman walking a dog just stopped and stared at me and really held contact as I walked past her. I'm used to getting funny looks. Lots of us will be because of the ways we find ourselves in these little places. And I thought she really disapproved of me there for that moment. I'm not sure what would have made that happen. And I walked another 10 feet to my car. And as I got in, I realized I had the giant puffball under my hand. And it very much looked like a skull. And it looked like I just exited the graveyard with a skull under my arm. So I thought, yeah, fair dues. She was quite right to really question that.
Lovely story.
You've got all this to look forward to, Eben. Many, many moments of madness.
I have to say, looking for mushrooms, I've found some unusual things on the ground. A lot of things that people throw away, unfortunately. A lot of litter, but also kind of odd things like I found a bottle, a plastic Lucozade bottle that someone had filled up with acorns. So and this was in the middle of a football pitch where there are a lot of fairy rings, where the mushroom known as fairy ring champignon or Merismus aureatus. And I don't know why someone had taken this project on, but you do end up finding weird things. And I remember posting on a Facebook group a couple of years ago this image, and I asked the question, what's the weirdest thing you found when looking for mushrooms? And then people have posting things like human skeletons, and then someone said they found 7 colanders like in the middle of the woods, and like not just 1 or 2, but some, in the middle of the woods in a remote location. I don't know how these things these human artifacts get dumped. But one thing that looking for mushrooms for me has helped me to be a bit more aware and conscious of my impact and the impact of humans on our environment. So you're looking for mushrooms, but you'll often find a lot of garbage and a lot of litter. Near me, there are some lawns outside the blocks of flats, and I'll see mushrooms growing there. There was a new block of flats, and there are something like, I found maybe 200 Caprinus comatus, known as the shaggy ink cap. They just popped up there one week, and I was like, this is incredible. And you need a key fob because it's a private property. So I knocked on someone's window, and this man, like with his little daughter, like they let me in. I had to take photos of all these shaggy ink caps, and then I went back like less than a week, 2 or 3 days later, because I wanted to get closer to them and maybe pick some, make a soup, and then they'd all gone, and it was like a massacre of mushrooms, because the grass had gone over the 2-inch regulation length of grass, and this is what humans. This is our current cultural preference. We like to see lawns which are just green. There's no grass growing there. There's no flowers growing there. There's no weeds, and there's certainly no mushrooms. And I think that's a shame.
Sad.
I think that's a shame. And if we go back to what we're all here for this evening. So it's the talk was entitled "Humans, Books and Mushrooms," and both of these books are very different. Roger's book included 1,200 species of fungi. Eben's book had 27, but they're both important in their own right, in that they are gateways and eye-openers into this amazing kingdom, the fungal kingdom, or the fungal queendom, the fungal queendom even. And the more we learn about them, I think the more we become we become connected with nature. And like Roger said earlier, it's a reminder of our own insignificance as human beings. We're just one part in the wider ecosystem. So I'd just like to round off by saying thanks a lot to our speakers this evening, Roger Phillips, Eben Grant, and also Ali McKernan, the fungi guy. Please stay in touch. You can follow Roger. Roger's daughter Lila has posted his Instagram. Roger Red Glasses. I'd urge you to follow Ali, the fungi guy, on YouTube and Facebook. It will brighten up your day. And thanks a lot to everyone for their donations. Tonight has raised £330 to the Devon Wildlife Trust. In addition to the £1,200 Eben's book had already raised, and I'll be sending out an email with Eben's mum's email address, so you can get copies of the book And the London Fungus Network, this is our first event of 2012, and we've got big plans for 2021. We've got big plans for this year. Hopefully we'll be able to get out and meet you in person, outdoors once it's safe. But until then, we will be having some more events online. So please stay in touch, follow us on Instagram and follow us on Facebook. And if you want to get in touch with any mushroom related questions or ideas or projects or collaborations, drop us a line, londonfungusnetwork@hotmail.com. So thanks a lot, everyone. And keep
An absolute pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Roger, Eben, Mike, thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.